And so when I shared that for the first time on stage, and I had a lineup after I was done to talk to me and say, you know what, I didn't have quite that same experience as you, but I had this. And just knowing how you could overcome it, like I was like, holy cow, like just how powerful it was, and realizing that sharing my story that I'd been earlier in my life ashamed of and afraid to talk about was just so powerful.
Welcome back, everybody. We're joined today by Victoria Pelletier, an award-winning executive leader, a best-selling author. Victoria, we are so happy to have you here today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Anthony, how's it going?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, Victoria, we'd love to kind of learn a little bit about you, your background, the things that kind of led you to where you are today, and figure out what makes you tick.
Well, it's not that long of a podcast, so I will do my best to be as concise as possible. So I'm a career-long executive stepping into my first executive role at just age 24 as a chief operating officer for a B2B professional services firm outsourcing. And then I've stayed in that path ever since, although it's not what I planned to go to school for. I went to university with intent on, after my undergrad, going to law school. But I love the corporate world. I love being a leader, so I've stayed there ever since. Also sit on multiple boards. I have written several books. Uh, Wife, mother, fitness fanatic, foodie, wine lover. That's like the well-rounded, fast version of who Victoria is today.
Stepping into an executive role at age 24 must have been quite the experience. So how did that happen, and how did you find your way through that at such a young age?
So I started working at age 11. And by 14, I was already in a leadership role as the assistant manager of the shoe store that I worked at. Graduated high school at 16, went off to university, and worked all throughout university through a bank, managing call center operations, and got promoted through the ranks. And when I got recruited for that COO role, even though it was a huge stretch for me, in that my capacity there, I led every function of the organization except for finance. So no HR, sales, technology hadn't reported to me before, but I did have a number of key criteria they were looking for. One, they had large banking clients, and I had worked for two of Canada's largest banks. I do hail originally from Canada. And I had been running large scale operations. And the world of outsourcing at that point was almost exclusively like contact center, think technical support, customer service, telemarketing before do not solicit. And so the other reason I think I stepped into that role, besides meeting and ticking a few of the boxes, is, and I'm not a fan of fake it till you make it, except for one thing: confidence. I have always showed up with an extreme amount of confidence, even when I had very little. And I learned very early that confidence is perceived or equated to competence. Um, and I've also been very good at building teams from very early on. So, in all of the areas where I didn't have expertise, and even those where I do, I try and make sure I hire the best talent, people smarter than me who know much more than I do in those areas. But the one thing, it was a challenge. I was the youngest executive by at least 2 decades. I was the only woman. I also happen to be a member of the LGBT community. I was married to a woman previously. I happen to be married to a man now. So I felt like I was the only on a multitude of fronts. And so there was a little bit of like a mask that came on at some point at work.
Yeah, I'm wondering how confidence and imposter syndrome show up in the same sort of moments, and how you navigate that.
Yeah, they do. I wish I feel like we need to come up with a better phrase than imposter syndrome, but I guess it is probably like the most representative of how I felt. I've also been very good at, I'm a very abstract thinker. I don't need to visualize things to understand where we're going, and my ability to be able to recognize the experiences I've had and translate those into the areas that were newer for me has helped me have a little less of the imposter syndrome, particularly when I was early in that role. Um, that said, the mask that I wore, besides one of great confidence, even though I didn't have as much at that point, was one I wish I don't know if you'll ask later, and I'll eat this question later, but I'll say it now. Like, what's the thing you wished your like younger self to know? For me, I showed up wearing this mask of all business all the time. I'm not going to show you I'm vulnerable. I'm not going to demonstrate significant emotion because I didn't want anyone to question my seat at the table. And so I got a nickname in my like mid to late 20s. I heard about it as the Iron Maiden. And so that was a result of imposter syndrome, in as a result of feeling so different from others, as the only woman, being so young, all these things, that I showed up in a way I realized like that's not the kind, one, it wasn't actually who I was, but two, when it's not the kind of leader I would want to work for. And so I had to pretty significantly pivot the way I showed up and the way I was leading.
So it sounds like leadership has been a thing that's come maybe naturally to you for quite some time. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, yes, it is.
There
I enjoy it.
was there something that you can kind of point to that kind of made you gravitate towards that, or has it just been your personality for as long as you can remember?
I It probably comes from a host of things. One, I played team sports as a kid. I'm not extremely tall for a woman. I'm only 5'8", but I did hit this height by the time I was like around 11. So, um, and I'm an adopted only child who came from a fairly traumatic, like early years before my adoption. And I think one, that made me more mature. Two, I looked bigger and older than everyone. I played team sports, was often put in this position. And so I think that, again, whether I knew it or I wanted it, I think I was kind of thrust a little bit into that position early on. And I also, I was fortunate to do fairly well at school. So I did a lot of tutoring of other people. Again, I just consistently was in this position. And so, um, helping people learn in school, being like the captain on a team, and those kinds of things just naturally put me in a position, or I was in a position of leadership that just translated into business.
So you mentioned, when you're was a COO at 24. I imagine the dynamics of having to be in charge of people that are older than you is challenging, to say the least. And I'm wondering, how did your like team sports and leadership role there, like, did that translate into the business world, or how did you do that? How did you like manage other people, I guess, and that maybe kind of look down on you because you were younger than them?
Yeah, I said my first leadership role was at 14, and I was as the assistant manager at a shoe store. And I remember that was actually my first, not only first leadership role, but like exposure to the people who weren't sure they wanted to take any direction from me. I remember one man in particular who was at least 20 years older than me, whom I had to like give some guidance to around what we needed done, et cetera. And I've felt that a lot over the years, and less so now that I'm getting into my late 40s. For sure, I'm certainly not the youngest anymore. Um, and for me, I've approached it in a few different ways. One, in you know, I'm in a position for a reason, and so I honor great democracy and freedom of conversation, and people can challenge me. And much like I will do to my leaders, but then there is a hierarchy for a reason. So I hate flexing that muscle, but unfortunately, I've had to one or two times. It's also been sharing and trying to build like a trusted relationship with people. I remember the first time I was relocated to the US for work. I think I was 20, 28 or 30 years old, and I was leading a large North American business. We had acquired a bunch of companies, and I was in a newer industry for me. And there was a woman who was 30 to 40 years now, 30. So I think I was 30. So she was probably like late 50s, early 60s. And I just remember like she's like, who is this young chick, Canadian chick who's moved here to New York, who doesn't know our business? I've been doing this for 40 years. And, I remember like it took a year working with her, but it was just a matter of like, Kathy, here's the things that I bring to the table. I deeply respect your experience, and hopefully the two will be complementary. And trying to get her on my side that way, that's been way more effective than ever having to flex the hierarchical muscle. But on occasion, I've had to do that as well.
How have you found the unfortunate reality that there is like extreme sexism in sort of all levels of the corporate world and just the world in general. Um, and you seem to have been able to overcome that to achieve the levels of success that you have. How have you been able to overcome those things, and how do you now help other people who might be struggling with those sorts of challenges?
For me, I've one, never played the card. I earned the positions that I've been in by um, being one, incredibly resilient, performing and understanding how success is measured, having a really strong personal brand, setting boundaries. There's things that I think I've actually, attributed to my success, or that I attribute to my success. And so when I walk in, I don't see that. I'm aware. Like, I just think of a few years ago, and I worked a lot in technology as well, where there are generally less women. And I walked into a meeting. I was the leader, and it was myself and one other woman and 40 men. And so this is just a handful of years ago. So it is very real. And so for me, um, I've never let it stop me. Like I said, I also don't. I don't play the card. I don't love to say that either. But have I ever gotten interviews because of my gender? Possibly. But I do think I've earned my seat at the table, and continue to demonstrate that. But it the need to progress diversity of all sorts, not just gender, um, and create equality, we're still significantly far behind. And so the way I choose to move the needle forward is by using my position and my platform to be an advocate, to promote other women and other diverse persons, by giving them opportunities, by challenging. I hate when people say, "Oh, they're like, there's no issue around equality." Well, the World Economic Forum last year, at the end of last year, did a report that said even in North America, we are 60 years away from pay equity. And you look at the Fortune 500, less than it just crept down. It's decreased. Actually, we're only at around 10% female CEOs. There's only 6 Black CEOs. Like, the data is the data, people. Like, so we need to be strategic, and we need to be intentional about how we move this forward. So for me, the strategic intentionality includes in any organization I work in, understanding the baseline from where we start. And as leaders, I think it's really incumbent upon us to find potential in diverse employees, and where there might be a skill gap, then it's on me to help them bridge it, to find people who are diverse, who bring like a multitude of other experiences to the table, and I'll help to bridge that gap to achieve their full potential.
Yeah, I think diversity is very important, and there's just so many places where we're falling so short of that. Making progress, but still very, very far to go. So keep up fighting the good fight, and trying to improve that for everybody.
You mentioned having to be resilient. Like, we're seeing sort of the byproduct of lots of years of work, and we're hearing about how you've gotten to where you are. But I'm curious if you can think back to one of those times where it was going horribly wrong, and you were like, how do I keep, like you said, you never played the card, right? Like, I think that's really important here. Um, what did that look like? How did you stay resilient when the odds felt like stacked against you?
I think, and it's funny, I'm doing a TED Talk next month, and the theme for the whole event is resilience. So I'll get to share it. So I've been like thinking a lot around this, and I do believe, first of all, I think there are some people who are just innately more resilient than others. And I believe I happen to be one of those. There's something in my DNA, fight or flight. I'm a fighter. I sign a lot of my social media posts with two hashtags. One is unstoppable, because nothing will prevent me from achieving a goal or objective I've set for myself. And the other is no excuses, which my children don't love. But although innately, I am incredibly resilient, I've had to learn how to be better at a healthier way of being resilient. And so for me, that, comes with a multitude of things, from, again, being clear on like your goal or objective, being really self-aware and self-reflecting. So when I talked about my early leadership, perceptions and the way I showed up, I need to reflect on where that come from. And then the next step is changing or modeling thinking and language and behavior. Uh, And then with that, also making sure I surround myself with people to support me. And then the last thing would be giving myself permission to fail. Like we all will, and we'll get back up. And so I've had moments of just never despair. It's not really in my nature, but I've had times where just so much was going wrong. I've been in my corporate environment a part of or supported around 40 mergers, acquisitions, or related transactions. Those all come with like incredible change and turmoil, particularly as a leader, as you're impacting other people's lives, going through restructure. I also remember the time where I was doing some of that and going through a yucky divorce. Like that. So, when one part of your life is good and the other one's bad, but at this point I was like, oh my gosh, like it's all just feels like it's crumbling around me. And so for me, it was just, okay, let's just get through the next day, baby steps, one foot in front of the other is progress. And like just remembering that. And then again, having some great friends around and family around to help support me through it.
Yeah, you said that twice. I picked up on that. Just having the people around you is a big help, and especially people that believe in you.
Exactly. I feel bad for my best friend and my husband because they're the two that outlet. Many times at the end of the day, I don't actually think I even need advice. I just need to like get it out. And that in itself helps. And so thankfully they both understand me well and respect that about me. And then do give good advice when I ask for it.
Yeah, it's great to have those people. I've been practicing the hear you, help you, fix it. Which one do you need?
That's great.
So you are an author, a public speaker. So it sounds like you want to get your message out to people and try and use that to help those people. Talk about how that started for you. Was there a moment where it was, something happened and you said, you know what, I need to reach people, and chose that sort of avenue to do it?
I there was one moment. The reality is I'd been doing it at a sort of a smaller level before that. So I it started, so I've been speaking first of all for 20 years, over 20 years, most of which has been like initially started with like business, corporate, conferences, we sponsoring them. And then I made the shift to doing much more and including some personal anecdotes in that as a result of, and I remember it was International Women's Day and I had asked to be the keynote speaker internally within my organization. And I had shared my story, my why, before in to a much smaller extent in one-on-ones and smaller groups, but now I was doing it in front of a very large stage. And so the story, first of all, is I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who beat me severely. That's where some of the resilience originally comes from. I was sexually assaulted in my teens. Da, da, da. Like I have lots of reasons to like have developed resilience. And I would get asked all the time, as a senior executive in my last 15 years or so, I've been in really, really large, like Fortune 100 companies. And so asked to share many times, like, what do you attribute your success to? And I realized I was doing a disservice by missing one of the most key elements of that. And that's my lived experience. That's my, to quote Simon Sinek, my why, the drive, where like I was determined I'm going to be better than my biology or the circumstance. And so when I shared that for the first time on stage, and I had a lineup after I was done to talk to me and say, you know what, I didn't have quite that same experience as you, but I had this. And just knowing how you could overcome it, like I was like, holy cow, like just how powerful it was. And realizing that sharing my story that I'd been earlier in my life ashamed of and afraid to talk about was just so powerful. And so that's when I said, okay, that's it. And so let's start to share this much more broadly. So the first book I was in, well, the publishers contacted me and I said one of my favorite words is unstoppable. That happened to be like the title of the book. So I'm like, okay, well, this is meant to be. So I just co-authored one chapter in that book, and that was the first time I put it down on paper so publicly. And then from there, I've continued to just do the speaking. And I remember taking a philosophy class in university, and we talked about whether altruism actually exists or not. Did Mother Teresa do what she, because it makes her feel good and whatever, that we won't get into that debate. But the reality is, as much as I am helping other people by sharing this message and maybe helping tell them the things that I wish I told my 20 something year old self, I actually walk away from that feeling great about having done so.
Was when you were telling that, you mentioned early on you had that Iron Maiden nickname, and it's like you've that's when you take off the mask and you're like, I'm real. This is the real story, and it becomes relatable to people who might, without knowing any of your story, just sort of look at you in a power position and be like, "That's not me. I don't know. Like, I can't put myself in those shoes." And then you say, "Well, actually, I'm a human too, and stuff happens, and some of it's good, some of it's bad, but it's a lot about attitude."
Oh, very much. I think a lot has to do with mindset.
I'm also thinking about my daughter. She's 8. She's a natural leader. She's always like got to have it a particular way. She wants to corral the kids and figure out we're going to play this game this way. And the thing I'm trying to teach her now is like, what are some of those, maybe you can help me, like, what are some of the techniques I can teach her now? Because sometimes the kids don't want to play her way. Or I had a conversation with my wife other night because I used the word bossy once, and someone corrected me and said, if it was a boy, would you call him bossy? And I was like, spot on, thank you. And so the conversation I had with my wife was about, like, how do we have this conversation with an 8-year-old? And we said, instead of calling them bossy, you say they are the boss. And if you don't want to play the boss's game, then go play your own game. You can be your own boss. And everyone is sort of their own boss of their own world, with the people who want to play until they don't. So I'm wondering if you can coach me a little bit on this and say, like, how do you talk to an 8-year-old who I think has a lot of the same characteristics that you're telling me about, in a way where it's empowering and I'm not accidentally calling her bossy?
It You asked the question earlier too around being a woman in business, and so I like that you said that, and I do think language matters, because what I will say, although I don't think being a woman's ever held me back, I have other nicknames beyond the Iron Maiden was likely self-deserved because I wasn't, or it was. There's no question about I just was showing up in a certain way, but I hear that I'm aggressive versus assertive. I've been called the other B word, and it's not bossy. Um, and those come about because there's like gender norms around traits, etc. So first thing would be, I do think language matters, and so being aware of that. The other thing is, um, she's 8. This is going to be hard to learn, but and I had to at some point, that I am an A-type personality and I move faster than others. And in business, the self-awareness of that and the need for me to slow down to let others catch up, that I'm not always going to have it my way. Like, we need to have this healthy conversation and debate, and that it's about building relationships to get people to follow you doing what it is you're doing in the way in which others might call you bossy. I think it's important, but I would encourage you to like encourage her to embrace that, but recognize like we all need our way sometimes. Like, this is the way of the world, and learning it now will make it so much easier as you grow up.
Yeah, my new attempt at how I handle the situation is, I'm like, what is the outcome you're hoping for here? And is the way you're talking to your friend going to get you there?
I'd be curious how she's answering it at 8.
She doesn't get it, but I'm going to keep working on it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, taking a look into the future now, what do your goals look like? Your short term, your long term goals, and how might we and our listeners be able to help you?
So I'm in career transition. I made the decision to leave my last employer last year, and so I'm looking for that next role. Ideally, to be back to being a CEO of a smaller company. But if not, I'm open. I'm the single earner for our family, so I need to work. So if that means staying in Fortune 500, running big business units, I'm happy to do that as well. But I'd love to like marry all of my transformation work, M&A work, into like maybe a private equity portfolio company as either the CEO or a strong number 2. So that's kind of the more immediate thing on the horizon. Longer term, I've sat on multiple boards over the years, private boards and not-for-profit boards. My intent is to get on a public board at some point. I already have the portfolio career. If your audience is not familiar with that, that's kind of what most people think of when they get closer to retirement. And that's just the stuff that they choose to keep busy with besides their sporting events and, and art and whatnot. That's board work, it's coaching, it's maybe some consulting, it's speaking, those kind of things. So I do that now, and I continue to do that by choice, but I'd like to continue to see that grow. And then although I said I'm doing a TEDx talk next month, which I was approached to do, I didn't apply. I hope that TED someday, like the actual big TED stage, calls to me to do that as well, and maybe get paid the same as the likes of. I spoke after Gary Vaynerchuk on stage, and clearly everyone was there to see him and not me. And I don't command the kind of fees that he and Simon Sinek and Brene Brown and others do, but that's another aspiration for me.
Very cool. I'd love to hear a TED talk. The TEDx talk, those get posted somewhere?
They actually go directly on the TED platform. Unless, as I've learned, you're like wearing logos or something, like, because then they don't make them. Those ones can't go viral. So I have a few brands I really like, but I'll be very good to steer clear of those. But you will be able to see it on the TEDx Miami website, and it will go directly on TED.com.
Very nice. I'll keep an eye out for that one.
Thank you.
Where do you want to go now?
Yeah, I guess we can wrap it up here. Well, Victoria, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. It was a really good conversation. We really enjoyed learning about you and the things that got you to where you are. We wish you the best of luck, and hopefully to see you on the big TED stage one day.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Till next time, everybody, be well.